Hey, ladies and gentlemen, since we can't seem to hook up with class today, I thought I'd do the lesson that I wanted to cover this way. We were going to do Vietnam and start Vietnam today, and this is how I was going to start it off. I was going to talk about um, if these were conditions that you were forced to live in for your lifetime, would you be able to go to war to change these things? And some of the things that the Vietnamese people were dealing with was starvation, poor living conditions. They were being forced to adhere to a religion that they did not believe in. They had another country making decisions over their country. They had limited education, no way to improve their social status. Wages were low, the laborers were exploited, and rampant opium and alcohol use. What had happened is during the colonial period, when all of the powers of Europe were going through and snatching up countries to control them, to colonize them, to make them better, all these countries in Southeast Asia are taken over by different colonial powers, be it France, be it Britain, be it the United States, not so much, and Belgium, Germany, places like that. And the country that's known as Vietnam, it was taken over by France, and it was known as French Indochina. Some of the content vocabulary that we're going to cover today that's really important are things like domino theory, napalm, Agent Orange, Viet Cong, Gulf of Tonkin resolution, Ho Chi Minh, and then just the idea of containment. And if you'll remember, containment is containing, it's dealing with communism, and it's containing communism where it already is. Remember, communists are the big bad in our history at this point, and we don't want communism to spread anywhere else. And so Truman and his Secretary of State, Kennan, had theorized this idea of containment. It's already in certain places, Soviet Union, China. We want it to stay there. We want to contain it where it already is. All right, the Vietnam War as a war is not a war because there was no official declaration of war. It is a police action. But the Vietnam War, we're just going to call it that for right now, lasts from 1965 to 1975. However, it is a little bit longer than that. Where in the world is Vietnam? If you look at this map right here, this is a map of Asia. Okay. It includes some things that you might not traditionally associate with Asia, like things like Russia or Belarus or Ukraine or Pakistan or in Afghanistan. And really, it should include places like Iraq, Iran, Israel, Jordan, places like that. All of that is on the continent of Asia. Vietnam itself is in Southeast Asia. So here we have China. Here we have North Korea, South Korea that you can see. Remember, we had fought the Korean War in the 50s for the communists had flooded over that border and took over North Korea and came all the way down in South Korea. And we had pushed them back to that destabilization, that demilitarized zone. So Korea split in half. Vietnam is here. It's this little bitty slip of a country. It's very narrow at parts in Southeast Asia. And countries that are going to be important to us in the discussion of Vietnam are going to be Vietnam itself, Cambodia, this country here, Laos. Those are all countries we're going to talk about in the course of talking about the the Vietnam War. Okay, so some major events that we need to know about in terms of the Vietnam War. We need to know about Ho Chi Minh declaring an independent Vietnam, the battle, which is in 1945. What precipitates people wanting independence from their colonial powers is in World War II. A lot of the countries, the colonial powers that had controlled places at this time period had weakened their control because they were too busy fighting World War II and Nazism. And so you see a lot of nationalistic feelings spring up in some of these places that had been controlled by these colonial powers. So the Vietnam War itself is as far as our official involvement in it goes from 1965 to 1975. But you can see on this that it goes so much further back than that, 1945 all the way to 1975. Vietnam, this is Ho Chi Minh right here. Vietnam before World War II. In the early 1900s, this nationalism, this pride in your country, we've talked about that term before in regards to World War I, nationalism is strong in Vietnam. And as the Vietnamese seek independence or reform from the French colonial government, several political parties of reform are formed. One of those being the Communist Party, which is led by Ho Chi Minh, because he had traveled around Europe looking for people to help him break the French stranglehold over his country, and nobody would help him except the Soviet Union. And so he became an advocate for communism because they're the only ones that were going to help him achieve his country's independence from France. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh helped the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, and they worked to overthrow France. But they're not very successful in the 30s, and Ho Chi Minh is eventually going to be exiled to the Soviet Union and to China. He comes back to Vietnam in 1941, and Japan had control of the country because Japan was trying to annex all these small countries to get resources. So Ho Chi Minh is able to sneak back into the country, and he organizes the nationalist group, the Viet Minh, which the United Communists and the non-communists, and both of them are going to work together to force Japan out during World War II. And so in 1945, with the Allies' victory over Japan, Ho Chi Minh and his followers declared Vietnam an independent nation. But France, now that they no longer have to fight World War II, send troops back into Vietnam to try to regain its colonial empire. And we, the United States, we backed France because we did not want Vietnam to fall to be communist. It's this theory called domino theory. It was pioneered under Truman, and Eisenhower really pushed it. The fact that, if you stick dominoes up end on end, and you can see in the cartoon right here, that if you push one over, the other one's going to fall, and another one's going to fall, and another one's going to fall, unless we do something to stop it. And the thought was that if Vietnam falls to communism, then it's going to be Cambodia and Laos, and then a short hop, a skip, and a jump to all the rest of Southeast Asia, and then places like Australia, and eventually we would fall to communism. So what theory is it that Eisenhower uses to defend our involvement in it? It's called the domino theory. Okay. Despite aid from the United States, the French are going to struggle against the Viet Minh. And our aid comes in the form of monetary policy and a little bit of official advisors that we send over there. And one of the reasons that they're having a very hard time fighting the Viet Minh is the warfare the Viet Minh were using. Guerrilla warfare. These are irregular troops who blend into civilian population and are difficult for the regular army to fight. And they're fighting from the hills and from the hide, and they use hit and run ambush techniques. So it's very hard to find them and figure out who they are and fight against them. The Geneva Accords, by 1954, the Viet Minh forced the French to make accords with them because of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu, where the Viet Minh collected the French troops into the garrison at Dien Bien Phu and held them captive there for weeks, 55 days. A soldier who was there described Dien Bien Phu as hell in a very small place. This forces the French to come to the table to make peace terms, and withdraw from Vietnam. Negotiations to end the conflict are called the Geneva Accords, and Vietnam, like Korea, is going to be divided along the 17th parallel in this case. Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh are going to control North Vietnam, which you see on this map here. Its capital is Hanoi. In the south a pro-Western regime, a democratically elected government is going to control, and their capital is going to be at Saigon. Also, at the same time, Cambodia is recognized as having their independence from France as well. After the French defeat, we began to take a more active role in halting the spread of communism to make sure it doesn't go any further. You can see in the picture, this is President Eisenhower meeting with the South Vietnamese president, Ngo Dien Diem. Ho Chi Minh, however, becomes a national hero despite his tough leadership, not just in North Vietnam, but also in the South Vietnam too. There were large pockets of people in the South that supported Ho Chi Minh as well. The USA, which is led by President Eisenhower at this point, promised Diem aid and training. And we began to send more of these advisors into Vietnam to help train the Vietnamese troops. In 1956, elections are supposed to be held to reunify Vietnam. We step in to protect the new government in the South, led by Ngo Dien Diem, who is a pro-Westerner and an anti-communist. He is also a Catholic in a nation that is largely Buddhist. And he is notoriously horrendous and harsh to the Buddhists who practice in his country. So the tensions between North Vietnam and South Vietnam are going to continue to escalate, with us caught in the middle. Truman Doctrine stated that the U.S. would have to step in here because we're trying to stop the spread of communism. And that one we've talked about. We use the Truman Doctrine. After Ngo Dien Diem refuses to hold these national elections that were supposed to be held, and he refuses to hold them because he knows that he's going to lose his position of power and Ho Chi Minh and the communists are going to take over. Followers of Ho Chi Minh in the South are going to create a new guerrilla army to try and kick out Ngo Dien Diem called the Viet Cong, which you will also see them abbreviated as the VC. And their goal, the VC's goal, is to unify North Korea and South Korea into one country under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh. Meanwhile, we are trying to continue to support Ngo Dien Diem and sending more and more advisors. And when I keep saying advisors, they're not advising. They're supposed to be training the South Vietnamese troops how to fight and how to battle. But they're not, because a lot of the South Vietnamese troops are going to be supportive of Ho Chi Minh and his policies up north. So they are Viet Cong. And it ends up that we are doing the fighting. We're not advising in any capacity. We're the ones that are doing the fighting. The unpopularity of President Diem is increasing because he is corrupt and because of his anti-Buddhist policy. And like I said, Buddhism is the most widely followed religion in Vietnam. Not only is he going to outlaw the practice of Buddhism, he's going to burn temples, and he's going to kill Buddhist clerics that are protesting his thing. And Buddhist monks practice self-immolation. They burn themselves in the middle of crowded streets to protest Diem's government. And Time and Life had a lot of photographers on the ground in Vietnam and captured pictures like what you see here. And these Vietnam is brought back to our homes in very vivid color. And we see pictures like this going on, and we don't understand this, and we don't know why. Diem, it comes to a point where we cannot support him any longer. And Diem is eventually, without our support behind him, overthrown and executed, forcing the United States to begin step in and become more and more involved. And the picture behind the words here is the spot where Diem was assassinated And you can see the bullet holes in the wall there. And that's where we're going to stop for the day. If you get a chance, this video, Vietnam in HD, is really good. It's History Channel, and I highly, highly recommend it. Attached to your homework for this is also some notes where you can fill in, but you don't have to fill in the notes. But there are questions along the left-hand column that you guys do need to answer. And hopefully we can figure this out and get something situated where we can get our classes back on schedule. And I'll see you guys later.